Alright, I want to try to explain something that's kind of difficult to comprehend in Python, especially if you don't have programming experience in any language. And it's basically how to structure your code so that you can define blocks of code. And in order to demonstrate that, first I want to show you an example using a different language. This is something I made up real quick in C#, and this language is much different from Python because you use these curly braces to define your blocks of code. Okay, so this is just a quick example of a program that'll go through. It creates a bunch of integers here, a list of lists, and it goes through each row and then each column and determines whether or not it's an even square. I don't know, just something I came up with real quick. And it'll print it out and then increment this count variable. And it executes this stuff within different blocks. So first I've got my block here. This is the main block of code that will execute when the program runs, and that's defined by this curly brace at the beginning and this curly brace at the end. Okay. Then inside there I have some more little sections that are defined using these curly braces. Here I've got another block of code, and I have it's basically a loop condition here, and it's defined using the curly brace here and the curly brace here, and then there's a nested one inside. Again, there's curly braces to define the blocks. Then I do a conversion here, and then I have an if statement that's also defined inside this block using these curly braces. In a language like this, it's much easier to visualize where these blocks of code are because you can see exactly where it ends and where it starts and where it ends. In Python, it's much different. So, and in something like C# here, these curly braces can be in any spot as long as they are there. So for instance, that works. I could put that, I could have this entire program all on one line of code, right? And it still executes the exact same way, right? As long as I have, so there's the beginning curly brace of that one, and it highlights the other one for me there. And as long as those curly braces are there, those blocks of code are very well defined for this language. Okay, so there you have it. It's difficult to read, but that's valid syntax for C#. And in Python, you have to do things a lot differently. So I'm going to show you the same program, but using Python syntax. Okay, so here I am creating my list of all my integers, my two-dimensional list here. I create a variable. Notice how there's no spacing at the beginning part of this this code, right? The first line, it's the first line of the code, so there's no white space in front of it, no tab spacing. Okay. Here I've got an integer or a variable that I'm declaring and setting some value to it. So again, it's got no indentation to it. Then I have this, and now I'm starting a for loop, right? And where it starts, it has no indentation in front of it. But now this is defining a block of code. So everything that is inside or within this loop body must be indented at least one time, okay? And that's just the structure of Python. A good rule is anytime you have one of these colons, the next line has to be indented, okay? That's it. That's, as long as you remember that, then you'll definitely be off to a very good start. So I've come here, I've done my for row in list of lists, and I put in my colon. So the next line has to be indented within, so now it is within this this body of the loop. Now I'm creating another loop, okay, for column in row. So this is a nested loop, and you'll notice I have another colon here, so the next line has to be indented, okay? If I were to put it here, that's going to give me an error, because, and you'll see, look at my editor comes up and says, what's it say? Expecting an indented block. So you have to come in and you indent it. And the way I'm indenting is I'm using my tab button. I find that a little easier and more consistent with Python. You can use spaces if you want to. Like I could come down here and instead of tabs I could do spaces. The spaces have to be consistent through your block. But that's why I prefer to use tabs, because you only have to press it one time for each space, each indent. Whereas if you use spaces, you may have to press it 2 or 4 times. And if you miss it once, it may cause problems, and so on and so forth. So I prefer to use tabs, the tab button for Python. But yeah, so here I've created my nested loop. I come down, and that line has to be indented, okay? This next line, I want that to be inside this block of the for loop, so that also has to be at the same level, right? Everything at this level right here, you can kind of see this line, right? If that line were to go up, that would be the level of indentation for this block of code, okay? And a block of code is just a section of code. Now I've got an if statement, and that defines another block. So you notice this colon here, that's how you define a block. So the next line has to be indented, okay? The following lines don't have to be. I could have this right here, but that's going to cause a problem because it is not inside my if statement. So this is going to execute every time. So it's going to execute this, then it's going to do this check. If that check is true or false, it doesn't matter. It's going to come back to here, right? And then it's going to execute that. I don't want it to execute there. I want it to execute also if this is true. So that's going to give me some weird behavior. So I need to make sure that's indented inside my if. So anything that is at this level where this print is here on line 12 or further is going to be, if it's indented to this level or farther to the right, then it is inside this if. And that's the word I'm using, the inside, and it kind of makes more sense when you look at this these blocks here. Everything is, and now that I change this formatting, it looks all weird. But let's see, seeing this very difficult to read. Okay, so these the curly braces, they show you where everything is inside this block. Okay, that is one block of code. If I put a line out here, some line here, that is outside the block of code. It's easy to see that because of the curly brace. Right? The indentation doesn't matter. I could have this indented all the way over here. It's still going to operate the exact same way, at least in C#. In Python, that's not true. So that's why I keep saying inside is inside this block of code is everything from the opening curly brace to the closing curly brace. So out here, you don't have those curly braces. You can't really see what's going on. But you could do something, kind of like this if you really wanted to, right? Imagine that's the opening curly brace, and then down here, this would be the closing curly brace, right? And we'd have one, we'd have the opening that opens it. Here's another if, that's opened, and then we have our closing, which would be at the end of the if, and then also at the end of this. So if you can kind of visualize it like this, it may help, okay? But the indentation is how this is defined in Python. I know it's a very difficult concept for somebody who is unfamiliar with programming, but the structure of the code is what makes it work. I don't know, it's very strange, and it's very difficult, but hopefully this explanation will kind of help that out. So like, for instance, if I were to unindent that, then this needs to be here, okay? If you can visualize that, what's happening is as soon as I decrease the indentation, it moves it out of that block of code. Okay, it's very weird. And if you can, maybe adding these little comment things in here, you can kind of visualize what's happening, okay? But that's the structure of Python. That is using the indentations to define blocks of code. That's how it has to be done. If you don't use the indentations correctly, you're going to get either indentation errors, or you're just going to get very weird behavior, okay? So be very careful. Hopefully this will help to visualize that, help you to visualize how those blocks of code are being defined in Python.